Hey guys, thank you so much and welcome to the Game Your Future podcast. I'm Daniel, and here at Game Your Future, we're all about helping gamers realize their full potential. And today, I have a special guest for you guys. This is Michael Garfield, who has been a futurist. His background is evolutionary biology, but has worked complex systems. And gosh, this guy's done it all. Everything from communication systems, culture building, just and has done a huge chunk of time just even as an artist, essayist, and podcaster and of course is a gamer. So Michael, thank you so much and welcome. How are you doing?
Doing all right, Daniel. Thanks for having me here.
Fantastic. So I know you've done quite a bit and been successful and have done some gaming in your free time. And from what I understand, you kind of came back to gaming too, right? So tell us a little bit about your career and kind of like how it kind of started. Maybe you kind of started moving away from games, and then we'll get to kind of how you came back.
Yeah, I think I think the nexus of this conversation might reside in something like where is optimization beneficial and where isn't it? For me, I was kind of monomaniacally obsessed with questions about the history and future of life on this earth for the first 22 years or something. I mean, I picked up Magic the Gathering at age 12, and that was my kind of dominant hobby until I found the guitar. And at some point, I became so preoccupied with trying to investigate these enormous ideas about the evolution of intelligence and human technology coevolution, where we're headed as a species, that it started to feel like a waste of my time to focus on games. And it took me a long time to kind of mature out of that monomania. And it's funny because like when I got back into Magic 17 years later, and I got back into gaming, video games, I had written a series of essays about the dangers of over optimization. And in part of the work that I was doing for the science communication at the Santa Fe Institute at that time, I was watching a lot of high level academic presentations and reading a lot of really brilliant papers about things like context collapse in the economy, or about model collapse and overfitting in machine learning. And I started to realize also that there was other work about the evolutionary utility of play, which is something that doesn't seem, at least it didn't historically seem immediately obvious to biologists that this had some sort of value to the survival and reproductive success of organisms. But it turns out that natural selection is operating on all of these different scales at once, that complex systems of which you and I and an economy and any organization are all examples, depend on uh, noise in order to perform as well as they can. And then I was looking at economics lectures where there were really excellent critiques of like GDP, for instance, as an inadequate measurement of like human thriving, like generally like well-being in society. And I started realizing that I was taking myself too seriously, and that like in order to be a complete person, and in fact in order to really understand what I was learning and to embody that knowledge in my life, then there needed to be a more hands-on practical component. And I found that component in a return to gaming, and in starting to understand how all of these ideas found life in game design. So yeah, that it's been only a few years now that I'm back into gaming as hard as I have been. And there's still a part of me that kind of sits awkwardly with how much time and money I have put into gaming. But then I think about, the way that, games have always been a popular pastime among really intelligent and highly agentic people, chess as the like ancient Indian kings and so on. And the way that game theory itself developed, out of these, like cyberneticists and system scientists that were just really interested in games as model systems for understanding much deeper truths. So, I think that I nowadays it's like, if I'm playing a game of Magic, or if I'm goofing off in Tears of the Kingdom or whatever, then I see it with a depth and nuance that I didn't as a teenager or a recent college grad, and I'm able to um, not only appreciate the insight that goes into the creation of these games, but I'm able to uh, bring that into other areas of my life and apply those insights and apply the this idea that like it's this design is like the uh your decision landscape is constrained by the affordances, the structural stuff. I mean, I know that you talk about that a lot in your work,
Yeah,
so I'll
because I
stop
had
there.
right, and I had the question about it because I definitely want to get into that kind of area as far as like how that has affected other areas of life. But I want to make sure for those listening that we made sure that we understood and heard you right, because it's a fascinating story about, yeah, because most people, right, will hear the adage of like I grew out of gaming, right? I'm an adult now, so put the childish things away. And from what I heard you say is that you kind of, and don't let me put words in your mouth, but is it something that you said about you grew out of over optimization, which brought you back to gaming, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like like T.S. Eliot saying, we come home and know it again for the first time, this kind of a thing. That one of the things I learned in communicating complex system science is that there are these scaling laws that govern the life cycles of organisms, and play is typically a feature of the early life of something. There's like a kind of a cultural learning period where organisms have to develop models of their environment, and their social environment that changes faster than can be encoded in the DNA itself. So there's like learning at multiple different time scales going on, and that humans are this kind of unique case where our social world is so complex and changes so rapidly that for as long as we have been human, we have maintained this much higher level of curiosity and exploration and playfulness than other intelligent, most, if not all, other intelligent life. That there are these kind of metabolic trade-offs between growth and maintenance and reproduction, or like the way that uh, psychologist Alison Gopnik puts it in her childhood development research. There's an explore exploit trade-off, and typically as we get older, you can see this in the way that like most people report that the music that had the greatest emotional effect on them was music that they discovered as a teenager, and that
Mhm.
now like the stuff that's really moving your kids, your brain has kind of congealed in, by the time you're in middle age. I'm about to be 42, and so like I think now it takes a kind of uh, effort to remain as open and curious as I was 20 years ago. But we also live, I think, in a world that continues to speed up, and as a consequence, it's defying our models more than it did, much more obviously. And I say so. I think that in the biggest picture, that we are there's a big game, which is the game of social evolution and of psychological well-being, that strongly incentivizes lifelong learning and like continual transformation, that maybe was not as true in earlier generations in living history. And you see kids that are going to school now for entrepreneurship instead of like being churned out for factory work and this kind of
Right.
thing. And so there is yeah, there is this tendency for us to lean more and more into the models of the world that we have always developed, and kind of reduce the complexity of reality over the course of our lives. But it's also the case that, since time immemorial, that the truly wise are those who maintain a kind of curiosity and humility and the ability to see things through multiple perspectives. And that's one of these characteristics of, like an economy that has multiple different ways of measuring value, or people who can appreciate the complementarity of different strategies and rule sets, you know.
Right. And that's really interesting because that applies. I'm just thinking from, coming from a corporate background myself, right? Working for one of these big Fortune 500 companies, that you could see that in the business landscape, that if you measured only by one key metric, just like a singular metric, like, we're going to drive revenue, for example, and ignore everything else that goes on, everything else that you could measure or that helps, you're going to destroy your company because
Yeah.
there's so many little pieces that you have to make sure are falling in place of, and that's what happens a lot of the time, I think, with companies, right? Is that if you measure just the one thing, that you're going to get that you're going to achieve it at the expense of something else, which is going to, destroy either company culture, and then people are going to leave, and then now your best people are gone, or you're going to rob from the future because, like, well, it's the present revenue that we need, so we're going to screw ourselves in 3 years because we made X decision. And then now 3 years later, it's like, well, what happens? Well, back here we made this decision, and now we're screwed, right? So, so
Mm-hmm.
it's just so interesting that you say that, take it from multiple perspectives, like as you say, it's kind of like the old adage, like the wise will look at it from multiple perspectives. And you see this in business too, right? If you look at the one metric, you're toast, right? In the long term. So it's just really
Yeah.
fascinating to me that happens that way. So I'd like to talk, if we can, a little bit more on. I'm sure, because I'm curious. I want to make sure to focus in on that point that I'm sure everybody's excited about. As far as, okay, so we went, so you went from like, okay, I grew out of gaming, and now I'm focused on doing all these things. I'm over optimizing in kind of this maybe oh crap moment. And so tell us about kind of this moment where you kind of said, no, I'm going back to gaming. I'd love to hear a little bit more on that, to say like,
Yeah.
how did that come about?
Yeah. Well, I think maybe part of what happened to me in my early 20s was that I was I had lost some of my love for, well, I'll focus on Magic the Gathering specifically. When I was 15, I went to the Junior Super Series in this big tournament in Orlando in 1999, and that was the year everyone there was playing Necropotence decks. Like the um, the internet culture of gaming, where everyone's looking at each other and copying their decks, was really only starting.
Hmm.
At the time there was only like the dojo.net, so people could like see other people's designs and read on strategy. And I was just really discouraged by how different the environment in that tournament was from the experience that I had playing in my local game stores, and how it was boring, frankly,
Mm.
to just see the same decks over and over and over again. And I think something similar happened with video games, where I just felt like I was like min maxing all the time. And that, what was, even though I feel maybe I said something like it sounded like the opposite, but like, uh, for me, focusing entirely on these fundamental questions about life, intelligence, cosmology, consciousness, stimulated this drive to explore far better than playing in these, competitive environments. And but it's funny. It's like I've gone the other way, for the same reasons, somewhat, where, the deeper you go into a society that measures success in terms of, prestige, etc., the more, like, it turns out that I actually had a hard time pursuing those questions in, like, as a professional scientist, because that is a field that's governed by resource limitations that, make the competition for, funding and, reputation extremely competitive, and narrow the scope of the kinds of questions that people are typically willing to answer until they've attained tenure. And even
Mm.
then, if you really want to talk about the weird stuff, you're at risk of losing your job. So, or, your reputation, which is as important. The same, in a weird way, like the same thing is true in, corporate innovation. And when I was studying this at Mozilla, what I found was that, actually, Alan Kay of Xerox PARC has a lot of talks about this. I recommend looking up some of the talks that he gave at Stanford a few years ago, where he's just completely indicting the modern tech, landscape as being too committed to, uh, trying to, earn sort of like incremental innovations, and, funding stuff that, might deliver a kind of reliable 10x benefit over 5 years or whatever. But he's like, nobody is funding stuff the way that they were back in the 60s and 70s, where, they were not so concerned with, short-term profit maximization, and were willing to sink enormous money into long bets and to create very, risky portfolios. But that is the thing that we know, uh, does end up generating these step changes over time, where it's like, okay, you can make, a safe 5x over the next few years, and basically just come up with like a slightly better phone. Or,
Right.
that not to defend the current sort of landscape of AI finance, but everyone who is critiquing these companies for going hundreds of billions of dollars into debt, there's no model, there's no revenue model. It's like, well, actually, that to me is an indicator that they're laying groundwork for ideas that are going to be, uh, you know transformative within the next 20 years. And that sometimes it's not just about looking at, like, does this make sense on paper, because
Right.
many of our best decisions don't. So, like, coming back into the game, specifically with Magic, the difference that had happened over the 17 years I'd been out was the emergence of Commander as a format. And so, like, the idea that you're moving from these really tightly optimized 60 card decks in a very specific and coherent unified meta, where everyone is aware of everyone else's strategy, um, is not as, stimulating to me as the idea that you have this much larger possibility space out of building decks that are, like 100 different cards, and you're drawing from a pool of 30,000 plus cards instead of just the last 2 years of stuff that's like designed very specifically to Cohere. And so the thing that really appealed to me about Magic and eventually drew me back in was that I am constantly seeing new ways to get ruined by opponents. There's like the game is now providing a much deeper well of interactivity, or like the pool of interactions is much greater.
Yeah.
The sort of what they call like rule zero cultural dimension of agreeing on the power level that you're going to meet
Yep.
your pod of players in is a much bigger piece of it. And I think that piece is really, really critical. When you think about like culture as the dark matter of the economy, and the importance of the illegible in complex systems. And so something similar happened with video games too. Like I didn't just leap with both feet back into video games. I have found that the games that appeal to me now are a very specific kind, and they are the kind that afford much more like user directed
Hmm.
exploration of these enormous spaces. I haven't spent a ton of time on No Man's Sky, for instance, but
Hmm.
like the emergence of algorithmic procedural environment generation to me is a very hopeful thing, because it's like it really rewards people venturing forth, and like Minecraft, being able to get in there and play around and like build things yourself that were not pre-specified. Just the last thing I'll say about this
Yep.
is that I recently interviewed uh, uh, Chaim Gingold, who worked with game developer Will Wright on
Oh.
Spore. And like people may know, Will Wright invented SimCity.
Yep.
And so Chaim wrote this fantastic book called Building SimCity about why that game was so historically important, and how it broke people's brains because it was a game with no obvious win condition. And so he gets
Right.
really deep into the sort of theory about what is a game versus what is a toy versus these kinds of, again, like explore exploit trade-offs, and how it turned out that the reason that of for SimCity's success was that people in tech and science and education and all these different areas all saw in that game a way for people to finally understand some of the nuances of complex systems in something that was like simple and enjoyable enough to really go viral. So I think that
Wow.
there has been, and more games now are leaning in this direction. And I think that something that, for me, like the what's really exciting about gaming at this moment is that this kind of systems literacy is becoming more widespread and is showing up in more places. And that even though we're still dealing with, the game industry is like Hollywood, in that the more money that producers are willing to allocate to games, the more they tend to undermine gameplay in favor of like intellectual property tie-ins, the safe bets that
The
you
safe
see.
bets, right? Exactly.
Yeah, you
We
see
got to
this
make sure that
curve.
we get a return, so we're going to do our safe bet, which is kind of the current adage in Hollywood, right? It's all
Yeah,
reboots or remakes or sequels or whatever, because nobody wants to take the chance on a new idea and lose tons of money,
but
right? So
we're also in something like a golden age for crowd-funded indie game development compared
that's
to 20
I'm
years
glad
ago.
you brought that up. That's
Yeah.
exactly where my head was too, because yeah, it definitely feels like we're in an indie renaissance, right? Where it's because the AAAs are kind of hamstrung in that, like, that we have to do a safe bet, we have to do something that everybody will enjoy, and so we can make our return. So it gives the indie developers just this kind of wide open field to say, like, make what you want because people are tired of the same old rehashed thing. They want something new and interesting and different. And I think that's where we get games like the one that exploded. I've heard Stardew Valley.
Yeah, I haven't played it.
Oh, fantastic. And like that harkens back to some like to Harvest Moon, which is an old, SNES like farming sim game. And they just never really made other ones like it. Or, that specific company went in a different direction again with the safe bets. How can we just keep modeling the same thing? And this guy's like, no, we're just going to blow it up. We're going to do different. It's like one solo developer. And he killed it. Like he just, he doesn't have to work another day in his life. Like that's how well that game is done. But he still loves it so much that he still keeps doing updates to it. And you're like, this guy just what a showcase of just somebody that just loves the craft so much and just loves the game's industry. And it's these kind of developers. And like so you mentioned the kind of the open kind of systems game like a Sim City that got my brain firing too because there's so many games that do that now too. And that's actually some of my favorite genre of games now. If you've heard of Satisfactory
Mm, no.
or Dyson Sphere Program.
Mhm.
So those are just there's no win. There's no like, all right, you did it. Like it's just like here's a whole bunch of tools and here's like go try to exploit the resources to you can it has like a progression system, right? It's good in that sense of a game where it's like, all right, you're gonna have this level of tech and now you can unlock this thing and now you can unlock that thing. And you get to the point where like what do you do? Like Satisfactory is like, all right, you can build. Yeah, it's kind of like SimCity in that way. It's like, do you want to build just something cool and big, or do you just want to like, heavily optimize and I generate the most stuff per minute? Like that's or Dyson Sphere program I love because it has a little bit more of a goal where it's like, oh yeah, you're going to build a whole freaking Dyson Sphere around a star, and then once you're done with that, go do like 60 more because there's a whole bunch of stars out there and so you can keep going and there's like a whole leaderboard even of like who can generate the most power from Dyson spheres and it's like in gazillions of gigawatts or whatever and I'm just like that's I mean crazy and there's no end to it right there's no you beat it it's just how far do you want to go and how long do you want to play.
Yeah, I will say I think that the thing that everything is kind of trending toward, yeah, and Heimgen and I talked about this, is that the more compute we have accessible to us, the more we are leaning into the really really deep and surprising simulations.
Mm.
And the one thing that we haven't quite cracked yet is that it like my former colleague and huge inspiration economist Brian Arthur wrote this book The Nature of Technology, where he was like all technology is recombinant. It's about putting existing technologies together in new ways. But then every time you add a new thing to all of the technologies that exist, you end up with more than just a new thing. You end up with the thing that you intended, plus all of the unpredictable interactions with everything else. And so, yeah, right now, like there is a way you can kind of measure this particular kind of value in a game by, like long after I stopped playing Tears of the Kingdom, I was just delighted to see all of the like kooky Rube Goldberg death machines that people were building in that game. And just
Those are
like
so
they're
crazy. Yeah.
spending hundreds or thousands of hours after they have, like run a full total, completist thing through the game to just explore and tinker. And I like, the deeper and deeper tinkering seems to be the future of games. And for that reason, I want to give a note of commendation to one of my favorite games, Flux by Looney Labs, which
I don't know
is
this one.
it's just a very simple card game at the outset, but it's become very popular over the last, I don't know, 20 years or so. And they've of course they've expanded it to include all of these like there's Star Trek Flux and Cthulhu Flux and all of this stuff. They get the tie-ins for people just as an on-ramp.
Yeah.
But like even just the original version of that game is so simple. It starts with you just draw a card and play a card, and nearly every card that you can play modifies the rules of the game itself.
Ah,
So I wrote to Andrew Looney several years ago, and I asked him, like, did you realize that did you intend for this to be a teaching tool about complex systems and how the sort of internally generated rules of these systems evolve over time? Because even in a lot of these tinkering games, like, one of the things you can't do is play with like the underlying physics in Minecraft or Tears of the Kingdom in the same kind of way. And here is this very simple card game that basically undermines your efforts to try and like optimize a linear strategy, because at any moment the goal of the game itself might shift. There is a goal, and sometimes you can run two of them in parallel, but
wow.
like you can never quite be sure that the goal will be the same when the turn comes around. And so the sort of meta strategy for Flux is, well, first of all, just to enjoy the like chaos of it, and then second of all, like, you can kind of increase your odds of winning by trying to ensure that what I think of as like higher metabolic throughput of just being able to draw more cards and play more cards, because then you're more likely to stumble upon something that works. And so the game is an object lesson in this sort of like more sophisticated understanding of optimization, where it's much more like, real high level investors adopt these very diverse portfolios, knowing that they're going to lose most of their money on most of the bets, but that every once in a while one of them is going to pay off so much that it covers
It covers
everything
all of it.
else.
Yep,
um
exactly.
yeah, so
And
it's
as
very
far as
cool.
the, yeah, I was gonna say, as far as drawing the cards, right, and just make to see something that sounds a lot to me like the blue players in Magic the Gathering. If I just draw enough cards, I'll
Yes,
be able to get to what I was trying to get to and do.
absolutely. Yeah, that's a thing that I see some of my favorite Magic YouTubers talking about, that it's like on some level, you can say that this is a game about simply trying to, do lethal damage to your opponent. But on another more nuanced level, in order to achieve that, this is a game about just like playing as many of your cards as you possibly can,
Hmm.
and I think that as far as that applies to life in general, then it's really like a reminder for us to uh kind of like draw our attention back out into the periphery, like away from this myopic focus on whatever it is that we think we're doing. Because like you already said, there's this Goodhart's law element of like anything that you measure very swiftly becomes a bad measure. And so
Especially when
like,
it's done in isolation, for sure. Yeah.
yeah. And my graduate advisor, Sean S. Bjorn Hargens, after he left academia, went on to do organizational consulting with this sort of multi-perspectival approach, where he was consulting his clients on this flexible framework of at least 30 different ways to measure value in your organization, and like figure out how, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, like what kind of data do you want to collect? Are you focusing on the capital production, or are you focusing on psychological well-being, or are you focusing on, like the natural resource use, or all of these different ways to think about it? And then like making the case that even this sort of what he called a meta framework
Mhm.
is not rigid, but that there are all of these like local contextual dimensions to, which metrics you decide are best for your organization, and when to drop them and adopt something else, like when to, how to test the way that you are measuring things as a kind of hypothesis,
Yeah.
and tinker at that level.
I'll say
Yeah.
that's a whole conversation right there because that sounds fascinating. Because that's Because again, to throw it back to for those, own run a business or even at the high corporate level, right? That's exactly the same thing. Is if you stay in doing the same thing, eventually you lose, right? It's because you have to change and adapt not only with the times, with the economy, but technology. Because that's, I mean, the story of Blockbuster, right? Who was poised, who could have been the leader in online streaming. Just completely, they're like, nope, we have all these video rental stores. That's what we're going to stay at, and then just tank, right? You mentioned Xerox, I think was, yeah, Xerox Park, but coming from Xerox, that story of the copy company, right? That like eventually you do everything email and digitally. Why do you need copiers, right? So
Yeah. And then now, of course, you've got Netflix trying to acquire Warner Brothers.
yes,
And like on one level, you can call that a success story for exactly the kind of thing you're talking about. On another level, it's a serious antitrust concern. And if you're looking at like the adaptability of the media ecology at large, we have like you start to see these things playing out at multiple different levels again,
yeah,
and you're like, well, okay, like there is such a thing as like too big, too unified. So like even though they've done a very good job at pivoting, at some point you got to be like, okay, well, uh, we have to maintain a healthy field of competition in society at
right,
large so that everyone else can pivot too. And it's
yeah.
not just everyone like, sucking up to Netflix for production money.
Right, exactly. That's and competition, that's another conversation there because competition just breeds just, innovation and lower costs for consumers, right? So in competition, the users or the consumers win, right? Because you're going to get something that's better, faster, and cheaper because of that healthy competition. So I completely am with you there. So guys, so I know we could go in several different directions, and I hope we can continue to do so. For this particular episode, as we wind down, I just want to make sure we're respectful of time because this. And so, guys, those listening, those watching, definitely let me know which of these topics sound really cool to you. I would love to have Michael back on for another episode at some point because this has just been such a fun conversation, and you can tell it can go in many different ways and so many different topics to choose from. But gosh, but Michael, before we go, I just have a couple questions. Like, first off, where can people connect with you and find you?
Yeah, I mean, all of my writing and my own conversations about this stuff, at which about which clearly I'm very excited, and I love discussing on a regular basis with people. All of that stuff is at michaelgarfield.substack.com. You can find links to my other work there, or you can just go to michaelgarfield.net for a kind of overview of writing and art and music and the various other team projects I'm working on.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, thank you so much for doing this, Michael. It's been fantastic. I would love to have you back on the show again. And again, topics just a wide range that we can choose from. So hopefully the those watching, the viewers, the commenters will let us know which are the most interesting. But before we go, I do have one final question for you, and that of course is, what is your favorite video game?
Hmm. I've already been talking about it quite a bit. I think as far as my adult life is concerned, Tears of the Kingdom has just I've poured more hours into that than anything else. And of course, I've got small kids, and I'm not getting to explore the landscape of video games as much as I would like. So if people get a sense of me and want to make suggestions, I would love to hear them. I will say that like as a teenager and young adult, my favorite was definitely Final Fantasy VII.
Ah,
And I think you can kind of
yes.
see, with those 2 points, you can make a triangle and tell me what
Yep.
belongs on the other corner.
That's and if you want, I can give you also a laundry list of games to try because that's kind of my wheelhouse too. For those that
Perfect.
know me, it's definitely it's the Final Fantasy series and the Legend of Zelda series are kind of the top. For those watching and wearing a Metaphor, ReFantazio t-shirts, another great JRPG by Atlas Games.
Mm.
So if you like Metaphor, if you like Disgaea, the tactical RPGs, those are fun too.
Oh, dude, Final Fantasy Tactics.
Final
I
Fantasy
wish they would
Tactics, yes. So
please remaster it, please.
They
Hang on.
have. Did you know?
What? No, wait, when? Where? How?
No, like just recently. So as of recording, like within like the last month or two, they have re-released Final Fantasy Tactics on the Switch.
Oh my God, I got to get my head out of the sand.
Yeah,
Thanks so much for letting me know.
absolutely. So they're happy to share, right? So I think so they just title it Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles, right? So
Okay. All
so
right.
definitely check that one out. And it's and so it's up-resed and it's they have voice actors now.
Oh man. My wife probably will not thank you, uh, but my kids and I thank you.
There you go. You have to explain. It's like, no, they have voices now, honey. You have to check it out. They didn't have
Yeah.
voices back on the PlayStation version. So,
Yeah. I'm working her into gaming.
there you go.
I know we've already gone long, but I will say that like I do think that there is a sort of the one thing I haven't gotten into that I feel like uh she would probably really soak up is more of this like tabletop RPG, like
Mm.
the like D&D kind of thing where it's much more about sort of the like it's highly systematized, but there's a lot more kind of like a storytelling
Mm.
narrative agency, imagination, cosplay kind of thing. And like I'm realizing that is a thing that I think the deeper we get into the realm of proliferating virtualities with the future of the web, the more that kind of thing, uh, authors like Charles Stross, I think, rightly prophesied as being uh, kind of just like the future of human culture. You
Mm.
know that I, the takeover of gaming. He has a great keynote on gaming in 2030 that he wrote maybe 15 years ago. I highly recommend people to check out about this kind of trajectory that we're on toward uh, make believe and immersive world building and so on becoming more and more a part of just general society at large.
Mm. And that sounds a lot like the Ready Player One, that movie.
Yeah, although that's a great example of a world in which everything is sort of dystopian because it is so over indexed,
Yeah.
also. So
Yep. Exactly right. Gosh, so much. So, guys, thank you so much for watching. And so, Michael, thank you for being here. This has been fantastic. And again, would love to have you on the show in the future. This has been so cool. And guys, let me know in the comments which of these topics you want us to explore further in a future episode, whether it's, kind of the technology piece, is it the AI, is it where we see gaming going? Is it, just how gaming, kind of getting back to our roots or getting back to play as kind of the just this adage that even the wise play games, like play chess back in the day, right? So many topics to choose from. I love it. So Michael, I can't thank you enough for being here. And everybody watching, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, stay awesome. And I'll see you in the next one.